The rent was overdue. The electricity bill sat unopened on the kitchen table, and after working 3 jobs in a single day, Maria quietly fell asleep at the table before she could even eat dinner. She thought nobody noticed. But her 16-year-old son did, and what he did next would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever realized too late how much someone was sacrificing for you? Maybe it was a parent, a grandparent, or someone who quietly carried burdens you never saw. Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, love, sacrifice, and life lessons, subscribe to The Untold Cost so you don't miss our next story. Now let's begin. Every morning, Maria's alarm rang at 4:30 a.m. Not because she wanted it to, because it had to. She would quietly get out of bed, careful not to wake Ethan. The small apartment was usually dark and silent. The only sound was the hum of an old refrigerator in the kitchen. Maria would make coffee, put on her diner uniform, and leave before sunrise. Most people were still asleep when her day began, but Maria was already working. At the diner, she smiled at customers, filled coffee cups, carried heavy trays, listened patiently to complaints, and no matter how tired she felt, she always smiled, because smiling was easier than explaining how exhausted she really was. When her shift ended, she didn't go home. She went to her second job, cleaning offices downtown, empty hallways, vacuum cleaners, trash bags, dusty desks. For hours, she cleaned spaces she could never afford to work in. Then came her third job, stocking shelves at a grocery store late into the evening. By the time she finished, most people were preparing for bed. Maria was just trying to survive another day. And then she would finally come home, to Ethan, the one person who made everything worth it. Whenever he asked how she was doing, she always gave the same answer. I'm fine, even when she wasn't. Especially when she wasn't. Because that's what Maria did. She carried her worries alone. She carried her fears alone. And she carried her struggles alone. At least, that's what she believed. For most of his life, Ethan thought his mother was unstoppable. She always found a way, no matter what happened, no matter how difficult things became. But lately, he had started noticing small things he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, he saw his mother staring at a pair of shoes in a store window. She looked at them for several seconds, then quietly walked away. Her own shoes were worn out, the soles were thinning, the fabric was tearing. Yet she never bought new ones. Another night, Ethan noticed something else. Maria placed food on his plate, then told him she wasn't hungry. At first, he believed her. Then he realized she was doing it often, too often. She wasn't skipping meals because she wasn't hungry. She was skipping meals because there wasn't enough. That realization stayed with him, and little by little, the picture became clearer. The unpaid bills, the overdue notices, the worried expression she thought nobody saw. His mother wasn't managing. She was barely holding everything together. And then came the night that changed everything. Maria came home later than usual. She looked exhausted, more exhausted than Ethan had ever seen her. She sat down at the kitchen table, still wearing her work uniform, still holding a notebook. She planned to eat dinner. At least that was the plan. But before she could take a single bite, she fell asleep. Her head rested on her folded arms, the kitchen light still on, the untouched food sitting in front of her. Ethan stood in the hallway watching. Something about the scene broke his heart. His mother looked so small, so tired, so human. Carefully, he walked closer, planning to wake her up. Then he noticed the notebook. It was open, pages filled with numbers, calculations, bills, expenses, debt. At the bottom of one page, a sentence had been written, a sentence Ethan would never forget. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. For a long moment, he simply stared, unable to move, unable to think, because for the first time, he understood the truth. His mother wasn't struggling, she was drowning, and she was trying to hide it from him. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking, planning, worrying, and eventually, he made a decision. He was going to help, no matter what it took. That night, Ethan barely slept. He kept thinking about the notebook, the bills, the debt, and that heartbreaking sentence. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother asleep at the kitchen table, too exhausted to even eat dinner. The next morning, Maria left for work before sunrise as usual. When the front door closed behind her, Ethan sat quietly at the kitchen table, looking at the empty chair where she had fallen asleep. For years, she had carried every burden alone. Now it was his turn to do something. The problem was, He didn't know what. He was only 16. He didn't have a job. He didn't have money. And he certainly didn't have enough to solve problems that had taken years to build. Still, he refused to do nothing. That afternoon after school, Ethan started looking for ways to earn money. He knocked on neighbors' doors, offered to mow lawns, walk dogs, wash cars, carry groceries, clean garages, anything. Most people smiled politely. Some gave him small jobs. A few paid him more than he expected. Every dollar felt like progress. For weeks, Ethan worked every spare hour he could find. Weekends, evenings, school breaks. His hands became sore. His legs became tired. But he kept going. At first, he felt hopeful. Then he did the math. The bills were far larger than he imagined. Far larger than anything he could earn alone. One evening, he counted everything he had saved. The amount sat on his bedroom floor. Small bills, loose coins, and despite all his effort, it wasn't even close. Ethan leaned back against the wall, frustrated, defeated. For the first time, he wondered if helping his mother was impossible. Maybe he was too young. Maybe there was nothing he could do. Then something unexpected happened. A few days later, while helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, the woman smiled warmly. "You remind me of your mother." Ethan looked surprised. "What do you mean?" The woman laughed softly. "Years ago, when my husband was sick, your mother brought me meals every week." Ethan blinked. "My mom never told me that." The woman smiled. "That's because she wasn't looking for credit." Then she added something Ethan would never forget. "Your mother has helped more people than she realizes." That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about those words. More people than she realizes. The next day, another neighbor told a similar story. Then another, and another. A former teacher said Maria had secretly paid for school supplies when a student couldn't afford them. A waitress from the diner said Maria regularly bought meals for struggling customers. A single father explained how Maria once helped him pay for medicine when his daughter was sick. The stories kept coming, story after story, person after person, and suddenly, an idea began forming in Ethan's mind, a crazy idea, an impossible idea, an idea so big it scared him. At first, he dismissed it immediately. "No," he whispered to himself, "that would never work." But the thought kept returning. What if people knew? Not about the bills, not about the debt, about Maria, about the woman who spent years helping others while silently struggling herself. The more Ethan thought about it, the more convinced he became. Maybe the answer wasn't earning money alone. Maybe the answer was showing people who his mother really was. And so, without telling anyone, he began working on a secret project. After school, he visited neighbors, former co-workers, teachers, friends, customers from the diner. He asked one simple question. "Can you tell me a story about my mom?" The answers shocked him. Some people laughed, some cried, some smiled through tears. Everyone had a story. Everyone remembered something kind she had done. And with every story, Ethan became more nervous, because his plan was getting bigger, much bigger. And Maria had absolutely no idea. For nearly a month, Ethan kept the secret, until finally, her birthday arrived, and with it, the moment that would change everything. Before we continue, what is the kindest thing your mother, father, or guardian ever did for you that you'll never forget? Share it in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story, subscribe to The Untold Cost for more emotional stories about family, sacrifice, and life-changing moments. Maria almost forgot it was her birthday. Not because she didn't care, because life had become too busy, too expensive, too exhausting. Birthdays felt different now. There were no parties, no gifts, no celebrations. Just another day, another shift, another stack of bills waiting at home. That morning began like every other. Maria woke up before sunrise, drank coffee, put on her uniform, and headed to work. At the diner, customers smiled and wished her a happy birthday. She thanked them politely, but inside, she felt empty, not sad, just tired. 20 years earlier, birthdays felt exciting. Now they felt like reminders of how quickly time was passing. Meanwhile, Ethan could barely focus all day. His hands shook every time he checked his phone. Because for weeks, he had been planning something. And now there was no turning back. Everything depended on tonight. When Maria returned home after her final shift, she was exhausted. Her shoulders ached, her feet hurt, and all she wanted was a shower and a few hours of sleep. But Ethan stopped her at the door. "Mom?" she smiled. "What is it?" "I need you to come somewhere with me." Maria laughed softly. "Ethan, I'm exhausted." "I know. Can it wait until tomorrow?" Ethan hesitated, then quietly said, "Please." Something in his voice made her pause, and after a moment she nodded. "Okay." 20 minutes later, they arrived at the community center. The parking lot was unusually full. Maria frowned. "What's going on?" Ethan swallowed nervously. "You'll see." As they approached the entrance, Maria became confused. People kept smiling at her, waving, greeting her warmly. Some she recognized. Some she didn't. The doors opened, and Maria froze. The room was packed. Dozens of people stood inside. Neighbors, teachers, former co-workers, customers from the diner, old friends. People she hadn't seen in years. For a moment she thought she had entered the wrong building. Then everyone suddenly stood and began applauding. Maria's eyes widened. "What is this?" She turned toward Ethan. "What did you do?" Ethan looked nervous, very nervous. Then he stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. The applause slowly faded. And for the first time all evening, the room became silent. Ethan looked at his mother, then took a deep breath. "I know you're probably confused." A few people laughed softly. Maria folded her arms. Still trying to understand what was happening, Ethan continued. "For years, my mom has helped everyone." His voice trembled slightly. "She helped people when they were struggling. She helped people when nobody else noticed. She gave even when she didn't have much herself." Maria immediately looked uncomfortable. She didn't like attention, never had. But Ethan wasn't finished. "For most of my life, I thought my mom was strong because she never needed help." His voice cracked. Then I realized the truth. The room became silent. "She's strong because she keeps helping others, even when she's struggling herself." Maria felt tears forming, because suddenly she knew. He had seen. He had seen everything she tried so hard to hide. The bills, the fear, the exhaustion, the sleepless nights, everything. And before she could process it, the first person stood up. An elderly woman from their neighborhood. The same woman Ethan had helped weeks earlier. She walked to the microphone and shared a story that left the entire room emotional. But what happened next would leave Maria completely speechless. The elderly woman stepped toward the microphone. The room became quiet. Maria immediately recognized her. Mrs. Henderson, the widow who lived 3 streets away. Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly, then looked directly at Maria. "You probably don't remember this." Maria shook her head. But the older woman continued. "5 years ago, my husband was in the hospital." Her voice trembled slightly. "I was scared. I was alone. And I didn't know how I was going to pay for groceries that week." The room listened carefully. "One evening, there was a knock on my door." Mrs. Henderson smiled through tears. "When I opened it, there was food on my porch, bags of groceries. No note, no name. But later I found out it was Maria." Maria immediately looked down, embarrassed. The room erupted into applause. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't finished. "That food got me through one of the hardest weeks of my life." Her eyes filled with tears. "And I've wanted to thank you ever since." Maria wiped her eyes. She barely remembered doing it. To her, it wasn't something special. It was simply helping someone who needed help. Then another person stood, a former customer from the diner. He walked slowly to the microphone. "I was unemployed 3 years ago. My family was struggling. I came into the diner every morning because it was warm." He paused. "One day, I couldn't afford breakfast." Maria already knew where this was going. The man smiled. Maria paid for it. The room smiled. Then the next day she paid again. And the day after that. He shook his head. "She never made me feel embarrassed. She never made me feel small. She just helped." Maria covered her mouth. Because she genuinely didn't remember. There had been so many people. So many small acts of kindness. Things she never expected anyone to remember. Yet here they were, remembering all of them. One by one, people stood. A teacher, a coworker, a neighbor, a single father, a young woman who had once been her waitress trainee. Each person carried a story of kindness, a story of generosity, a story of Maria showing up when life became difficult. And with every story, Maria became more emotional. Not because she was proud, because she was shocked. All those moments she thought were insignificant had mattered, more than she ever realized. Then Ethan stood again. His hands were shaking. He looked around the room, then at his mother. And for a moment, he struggled to speak, because this next part was the hardest. Finally, he took a deep breath. "When I was little, I thought my mom was a superhero." The room laughed softly. Ethan smiled. "I know that sounds childish, but honestly, I still do." Maria immediately looked away, trying not to cry. For years, she worked harder than anyone I've ever known. She missed sleep. She skipped meals. She gave up things she needed, so I could have things I needed. The room became silent. "And the truth is," his voice cracked, "I never said thank you." Maria's eyes filled with tears. Because suddenly, This wasn't about the community. This wasn't about the stories. This was about a son speaking directly from his heart. And what he said next would bring the entire room to tears. Take a moment and think about someone who sacrificed for you. A parent, a grandparent, a guardian, a mentor. Have you thanked them lately? Tell us in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story, subscribe to The Untold Cost for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters. Ethan stood at the front of the room. His hands trembled. His voice was unsteady, but he kept going, because this was something he needed his mother to hear. When I was younger, he said softly, I thought every mom worked this hard. A few people smiled. Others wiped away tears. I thought it was normal to wake up before sunrise. I thought it was normal to come home exhausted. I thought it was normal to always put everyone else first. He paused. But as I got older, I realized something. My mom wasn't doing what was normal. She was doing what was extraordinary. Maria lowered her head. Tears rolled down her cheeks. For years, she had worked quietly, without recognition, without applause, without expecting anything in return. And now, her son was showing her that none of it had gone unnoticed. Ethan took a deep breath. There were times I wanted things we couldn't afford. And somehow, Mom always found a way. There were days she came home exhausted. And somehow, she still asked me how my day was. There were moments when life was hard for her, but she never stopped being there for me. The room was completely silent. Then Ethan looked directly at her and said the words she had waited years to hear. Mom, thank you. Maria broke down crying. Not because of the crowd, not because of the attention, because every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every difficult decision, every tear she cried in private, suddenly felt worth it. Then Ethan smiled. But we're not done yet. The room laughed softly. Maria looked confused. What do you mean? Ethan pointed toward a large screen behind him. Photos began appearing. Hundreds of them. Pictures from over the years. Maria holding Ethan as a baby. Maria helping him with homework. Maria cheering at school events. Maria working at the diner. Maria smiling despite being exhausted. Maria giving her best every single day. The room watched in silence. Then the final photo appeared. A simple picture taken just a few weeks earlier. Maria asleep at the kitchen table, still wearing her work uniform. Dinner untouched. The same night Ethan found the notebook. The same night everything changed. The room grew emotional, because that single image said more than words ever could. It showed sacrifice. It showed love. It showed strength. And it showed the true cost of caring for someone. Then Ethan revealed one final surprise. For weeks the community had been quietly contributing. Neighbors, friends, former customers, teachers, cow workers, people whose lives Maria had touched. Not because Ethan asked for money, because they wanted to help. The amount raised was enough to pay her overdue bills, enough to clear her debt, enough to give her room to breathe again. Maria covered her mouth. She couldn't believe it. For years, she had been carrying the weight of the world alone, and now, the people she had helped were carrying some of that weight for her. But what touched her most wasn't the money. It was something far more valuable, the realization that her life had mattered, that her kindness had mattered, that her sacrifices had mattered, and most importantly, that her son had seen it all. As the evening came to an end, people gathered around Maria, sharing stories, laughing, crying, hugging her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Maria and Ethan sat quietly together. The apartment looked the same. The furniture was the same. The walls were the same, but somehow, everything felt different. Maria looked at her son. When did you grow up? She asked softly. Ethan smiled. I had a pretty good example. Maria laughed through tears. Then she pulled him into a hug. The kind of hug that says everything words cannot. And in that moment, neither of them cared about the money. Because the greatest gift wasn't financial freedom. It was knowing they had each other. Moral of the story. The people who love us often notice more than we think. The sacrifice made in silence are rarely forgotten forever. Kindness has a way of coming back when we need it most. And sometimes, the greatest reward for a lifetime of giving isn't money. It's discovering that your love changed lives. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. What is one sacrifice someone made for you that you'll never forget? And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, love, sacrifice, and life's deepest lessons, subscribe to The Untold Cost, because sometimes the greatest heroes aren't famous. They're the people who quietly give everything for the ones they love.